Story 1: The Great Glitter Mystery. There is a company in New Jersey that is the top glitter manufacturer in the world. When interviewed, they were asked who their biggest client was. They refused to answer, saying they do not want people to know. This has led millions of people to speculate about who the biggest glitter client in the world is and why it is kept secret. Story 2: I went down the rabbit hole about the Silk Road Marketplace, the illegal black market site on the deep web. I always found it fascinating that one individual was able to contribute so much to drug trafficking simply from his laptop. The whole story is very intriguing to me. It is actually one of the reasons I entered my current field, which is cybersecurity. The internet is a vast and enormous place. The amount of crime that occurs simply from people's computers has always amazed me. Story 3: Going very deep into the history of a family I have no relation to on my ancestry because I could not find much about my own family. I traced back to 1600 on the Bennett family by checking church records from 400 years ago. John Bennett, a blacksmith, lived to be 92 and died in 1647. Story 4: The American Chestnut Blight. What was once the redwood of the East Coast was practically wiped out in the early 20th century due to imports of trees from Asia that contained the blight fungus but were resistant. Today we have the technology to bring back the American chestnut using minor gene modification, believed to be from wheat, but federal approval has not yet been granted to reintroduce it. This is a fascinating example of science where we have the power to restore an almost forgotten yet iconic species. I find this an incredibly interesting topic and explored it deeply. Story 5: Back in the early 2000s, I stumbled upon a website where the only content was one man's Walmart receipts. He would go shopping, then scan and upload his receipts for people to see and comment on. He had been doing this for a few years by the time I found his website. I spent about 3 days looking at Walmart receipts because, after a while, they started to tell a story. The man got married, had a child, and I stopped following around the time the child was potty trained. It was like a journal written in Walmart receipts. You could follow him through the seasons, see when he had a cold, observe birthday cards and gifts for family, and watch the growth of his child through his Walmart purchases. It was fascinating. Story 6: African American women's hair braiding YouTube videos. I am a bald white man. The algorithm now keeps pushing videos on intricate hair weaves, treatments, and braiding. I keep watching, fascinated by how it all works. Story 7: Someone stole one of my parents' identities and wrote many thousands of dollars in checks from a joint account, which at that time was my primary account. The individual changed my parents' home address to Texas, ordered the checks to an address in Texas, and forged them to make it look like payment for in-home skilled nursing care. Nobody in my family uses such care or has ever lived in Texas. We filed police reports, completed affidavits, and went through many obstacles. Due to the ineptitude of the bank, it took over 6 months to both have the money returned and to close the account, because the bank kept refunding money to the compromised account and continuing to allow the individual to update the home address to the one in Texas. When the bank requested a police report or affidavit, they sent it to the perpetrator, which led to us receiving death threats by text. Fortunately, they did not appear to be credible. They were just angry they could no longer steal our money. The financial situation is now resolved, but it has been a long, exhausting process. I spent more than 20 hours on the phone with the bank, over 5 hours in meetings with detectives, and more than 5 hours filling out paperwork. My parents spent at least twice that amount of time, probably closer to 3 times as much. We have no expectation that the police in my state, my parents' state, or Texas will pursue this further. The fact that it involves multiple states and a financial crime, and that we have theoretically been made whole, makes prosecution very unlikely. However, the address on the checks and the names of the individuals signing them, 15 checks to one person, 2 to another, are fully traceable. They are real people, not anonymous or clever criminals. I find myself researching their lives. They live in the city where the checks were ordered and are connected as friends on social media. I know which elementary schools they attended, where they worked, and for how long. I do not know if they were willing participants or coerced, but I do know they are not healthcare workers unknowingly involved in fraud. They definitely knew this was a crime because they were not licensed to provide the services they were paid for. It is a maddening situation, I have no desire to be a vigilante, but I also know they will likely get away with stealing thousands of dollars I could not afford to lose, making half a year of my family's life miserable. I am struggling to let it go. Story 8. The Trials Game Easter Egg Treasure Hunt. There is a series of video games that people are probably at least vaguely familiar with called Trials. It is a game in which you ride a bicycle or motorcycle from point A to point B and ride over obstacles, do flips, and more. I have never actually played it, so apologies if this is not a great description. In summary, players found some items and locations in the game that seemed to be related. Someone figured out that it appeared to be a puzzle spanning multiple versions of the game. The puzzle was very complicated, including secret websites, real-life locations across the globe, analyzing sound waves from songs, and more. The last step established was that someone needed to be in a specific location to receive a package in the year 2100 or something similar. The person I was following, who kept up on this, stopped posting. Completely by chance, I saw him post on Reddit. I messaged him asking what came of the puzzle, and he said life had gotten busy and he had not been able to keep up. The last he heard, people had been coordinating to have their children and grandchildren at the location at the specific time. It is one of the craziest things I have heard of and probably will not hear its resolution in my lifetime, but the rabbit hole is a fun read to see how things were uncovered and how in-depth the puzzle is. Story 9. Oscar Wilde. This was in the early 1980s when no one was interested in studying him, his works, or his life. He was essentially still persona non grata even in university literature courses. I am a straight female. I was interested in a British actor who was cast as the lead in a play focused on Wilde. I wanted to know why he was cast. I was at university at the time, and at the library I pulled a biography by Frank Harris and started reading it. It read like a gossip rag, which made me suspicious, so I pulled another biography, this one by Hesketh Pearson, and kept reading. I became totally absorbed by the tragedy of Wilde's life. His wife and 2 sons' lives were also wrecked, and I really cannot tell you why I kept researching them. I was not interested in reading Wilde's work, only about his life. A few months later, I moved to Chicago, which had many used bookstores on Clark Street that are gone now. I scoured them for every Wilde biography I could find. I continued doing this for 20 years across 3 states, and also during a study abroad semester in London. It did not matter whether the books were printed in 1905 or in the 1980s. They were inexpensive because few people were interested. I have collected over 250 books and other related items about him. Interest in him exploded in 2000 because it was the centenary of his death. I had also discovered the internet, and at first I was thrilled. People I could talk to about Wilde. New books published on him. More new material to read. In a way, this was the beginning of the end of my interest because I found out Oscar was not their focus. Tell me what you think about him, and you will tell me more about yourself than you ever will about him. The academics in the universities claimed him as theirs. Gay men claimed him as theirs. Anyone who wrote about him claimed him as theirs. And Oscar himself got lost in the crowd. I missed Oscar, so I withdrew from the discussion groups and did not bother buying many of the books that came out. It was all a huge disappointment except for Stephen Fry. He starred in the one biographical movie that was worth anything. He alone, it seemed to me, understood Oscar and focused on him. I still have all the material I collected. I do not revisit it. It just sits there. And I still stay away from anyone who is a fan or scholar of Wilde. Edited to add. Anonymous has given me an award. Thank you, it is the first one I have ever received. I am going to close my eyes, envision Oscar, and hand it to him, because he deserves it far more than anyone else. Story 10. Sovereign Citizens. Between the police body camera footage of traffic stops and their court appearances where they try to represent themselves, my interest is a mix of fascination and sadness. Part of it is quite sad because these people have made poor decisions in life. On the other hand, they choose to live within delusion, and the consequences are compelling to observe. Story 11. There is a YouTuber known as Tang10146. He posts designs for gear systems and basic machines made in SolidWorks. Something about his videos makes them very captivating to watch. He is likely a retired mechanical engineer keeping himself occupied. Story 12. My roommate threw away some of my vintage silverware rather than wash it. I stored the rest and then searched the internet for replacements. In the process, I discovered that the manufacturer was the profit-making branch of a cult in upstate New York. They believed Jesus had already returned to Earth, that it was possible to create heaven on Earth, and that eugenics would help establish a community of perfect people. They believed in free love, but sex for pregnancy had to be approved by the cult. To train young men for effective contraception, older women in the community were encouraged to mentor them. This may have been the origin of the cougar trend. Oneida makes nice spoons. Story 13. There is a man on YouTube who can make a knife out of anything, and that has become my comfort viewing. Story 14. In the late 1990s, someone had a website dedicated to worshiping squirrels, literal squirrels. It featured detailed rituals and altars with photos of squirrels. Story 15. Companies that exploit uninformed and irrational people by selling overpriced, low-quality apocalypse survival products are numerous. I dealt with that for a couple of days, argued with someone about how a battery is not a generator, then moved on with my life. Story 16. Local jail bookings. This started when I found out an ex-coworker who had class like Mary Poppins had a rap sheet. Story 17. One of my favorite books is Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. One of my favorite movies growing up was Flight of Dragons. I randomly fell down a rabbit hole and discovered they are very connected. A man wrote a fictional natural history book called The Flight of Dragons. He was inspired to write it after reading Wizard of Earthsea because he was curious about how her dragons would maintain flight. The rabbit hole kept going, but I found great joy in knowing many of the things I loved as a child are connected. Story 18. Circa 2008, there was a trend of knowledge dumps and infographics being posted on 4chan. In one such thread, I came across a pastebin link to a text-only copy of what was allegedly a blog post at some point. It described how the internet child exploitation ecosystem worked before everything moved to the dark web. It explained everything from production, sale, and logistics of distribution. That alone was absolutely disgusting and disturbing. It also included a short mention of how they used infected personal computers as redundant file hosting servers and were well aware of the lives of those people being ruined upon being inevitably raided. The police were not competent enough or did not care to figure out that the file hosting was a hidden service running on it and not something the user set up themselves. This made me reevaluate how careless I was about software security up to that point, and I performed a complete purge and reinstallation of my computer on the spot. It's been 16 years, and I still think about that post sometimes. The sheer amount of human tragedy is unbelievable. I genuinely hope it was just a highly detailed and elaborate creepypasta. Story 19. Once I got involved in a workout forum where two gym enthusiasts argue over how many days there are in a week. Story 20. This was back when Facebook consisted of actual people between 2010 and 2012, not just bots and advertisements. I was still Facebook friends with some former childhood friends from whom I had long since drifted apart, and now they had become associated with undesirable individuals. My favorite Sunday pastime, while recovering from a hangover on the couch, was to browse their very public posts. One day, I saw a strange status that one of these former associates had commented on, so it appeared on my feed. I decided to explore his profile in depth. This man, whom I had never met, had dozens of posts, each several paragraphs long, posted in rapid succession. It was like the unhinged ramblings of a madman, and it was fascinating. I spent about 3 hours that afternoon reading through them. The posts covered topics such as aliens, God, demons, government conspiracies, flat earth theories, crystal orbs, the power of love, and the soul, you name it. Finally, I reached the first somewhat sane post, which read as follows: "Going to try ketamine for the first time. Wish me luck." I laughed out loud immediately. It felt like a 3-hour build-up to one of the most amazing unintentional jokes. Story 21. I found an advertisement on Kijiji, the Canadian equivalent of Craigslist, selling alpacas. I then spent about 10 hours researching and developed a detailed business plan for an alpaca farm. A friend who works in agricultural loans said that I would qualify for a loan as long as I had even a small amount of collateral. Story 22. Not super weird, but back in the late 1990s when the internet was new, I found a website that had every original 1980s G.I. Joe action figure. The nostalgia kicked in, and I spent about 3 hours slowly downloading photos of every action figure I had as a kid. The strange thing was I was only 19, and I was looking at figures that were maybe 10 to 13 years old. Story 23. The weirdest rabbit hole I have ever fallen into on the internet was reading about conspiracy theories related to ancient extraterrestrials and lost civilizations. It was fascinating yet bizarre. Story 24. Oklahoma City obituaries. This was last night when I had insomnia. I clicked on a Reddit account whose last comment was from late 2022. The last couple of posts were about her being old and ill, possibly it being her last Thanksgiving. She had many comments to read through, a lot about Breaking Bad, animals, and her family. Many little anecdotes painted a picture of who she is or was, an estranged daughter in the Navy and how she is heartbroken. She does not even know her granddaughter's name. An adult autistic son who relied on her being a stay-at-home mom. Her older husband was in the military, so they had to move a lot, and he is bad with money. She is wheelchair-bound and attached to an oxygen tank, but she still wanted to get her stories out somehow. She posted frequently on the Oklahoma City subreddit and mentioned her age, so I went searching. None of the obituaries matched. Who knows if it was my search skills, lack of online obituaries, or if she is still alive. At some point, I stopped searching and just kept reading through the newly deceased and whatever quirks their family members chose to reveal. All those little old ladies and where they met their husbands. A lady who loved cats despite her allergies. A supporter of former President Donald Trump my age who liked Glee. I do not know how to feel or what I wanted to find at the end of the rabbit hole. To the random lady on the other side of the world, I hope you are okay. Story 25. Morgellons disease forums and online communities discuss a condition where people believe fibers, threads, and insects are emerging from their skin. The majority medical opinion is that this is a mental health condition rather than a physical illness. These forums sometimes contain unusual content, including microscopic photos of wounds that individuals have created on their own skin in an attempt to prove the presence of fibers. Story 26. Somehow, I went from watching cute cat videos to learning about carpet cleaning, dryer vent cleaning, overgrown lawn and property trimming, and ended up exploring cake decorating. I enjoyed all of these activities. Story 27. Afghanistan is not strange in the literal sense, but more so because of how deeply invested they are in their history, the tribes, and the violent uprisings. The summary is that they are a culture of warriors. For instance, one of their tribes, the Hazara, are descendants of Genghis Khan. This helps provide context to their history, as they are mainly tribes of fighters. The oddest part of it all is what set me down the rabbit hole. A random painting found in a dumpster. I am not into art, but this one affected me. Story 28. One of the most fascinating topics I have explored is the Denver International Airport theories. Story 29. There is a whole set of YouTube shorts where former National Basketball Association stars talk about Larry Bird. I have watched probably hundreds of these shorts, even though I do not like basketball. Additionally, The Undertaker apparently has a podcast and makes YouTube shorts. I have watched a lot of his content as well, although I have never been interested in professional wrestling. I suppose I have a type. Story 30. There was a Reddit discussion about glory hole experiences about a year ago. Knowing nothing about them or the people who frequent them, it was actually a pretty fascinating topic to explore. Story 31. The engineering aspect of building nuclear weapons. There is probably no more useless topic to be informed about. The information is questionable and unverifiable. There is no real-world application, and it is a complex and difficult topic to understand. I strongly recommend anyone starting down this road to search for Bardcore instead and spend time in a more productive manner. Story 32. Definitely the story of Christine Weston Chandler, the creator of Sonichu and accused of assaulting their own mother. Story 33. This was about 18 years ago, so I do not recall all the details of how I got from point A to point B. I was pregnant and worked for a podiatry office. I handled many cleaning and sanitizing products, preparing rooms between patients, and was concerned some could be harmful to me. I began researching hazardous chemicals that should not be inhaled or touched during pregnancy. Each term was unfamiliar, so I looked them up individually to identify the products in which they were used. I encountered one chemical that led me down a deep rabbit hole because it was used in the production of certain items. Curious about what those items were, I investigated further. I discovered this hazardous chemical was used in making Splenda. My attention turned to learning more about Splenda. I found that the body cannot break it down, and it is excreted in stool. Moreover, it cannot be broken down afterward and, similar to microplastics, can be found in waterways. Story 34. I spent 2 days watching YouTube videos about caving and cave diving disasters. This inspired me to write a short story. Story 35. Someone in the community Facebook groups mentioned how my town passed an ordinance that allows you to have backyard chickens. I started looking at chickens to see if it might be fun to have them as pets. That led me to find out there are businesses that will rent you a chicken coop and chickens. I then searched how many chickens you could keep in your backyard, and the ordinance states 6 chickens, ducks, or 2 pygmy goats. This got me interested in goats and what it is like to keep them as pets. I was seriously considering how to fence in the yard so we could have goats before my husband talked me out of it. Story 36. John Titor and the Cyclop cryptogram. Spent many hours on these two for no good reason. Story 37. During the 2012 Mayan calendar issue, I wanted to look and see why people believed in this. That sent me down a deep and complicated New Age rabbit hole that I am still in. Story 38. My wife once told me about a particular group of Brazilian women who dedicate their lives to their significant others in prison. They spend all week preparing large amounts of food, buying snacks and supplies such as toothpaste and deodorant. They then meet up with other women and take the bus, often traveling hours, to the prison to visit their partners, give them snacks, have conjugal visits, and more. They have to dress a certain way and bring everything in clear plastic duffel bags. It is a whole culture, with businesses dedicated to selling these clear bags and specific clothing. I spent hours on TikTok watching these women putting together their significant others' jumbo packages for the week. It is a fascinating culture. They call themselves cunhadas, which means sisters-in-law. Story 39. I was reading an article about Jimmy Carter and his many contributions to Habitat for Humanity. I had never heard of the guinea worm before that. Story 40. How many people have died from inventing non-petroleum-propelled automobiles? Story 41. People on YouTube who mow lawns use large brush and shrub trimmers, weed whackers, power washers, and sidewalk edgers. They also clean up many abandoned homes or help disabled individuals for free. Story 42. At work, a client said they were working on a new urinary catheter and wanted me to get up to speed on this subject. My research on the work computer was blocked by information technology settings, so I did the research at home. Little did I know that there is a technique for using urinary catheters to fill a person's bladder from outside the body so that they feel the need to urinate. Story 43. I'm ashamed of it, but 90 Days Fiancé, especially that one couple who FaceTimed each other literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the girl was strangely jealous of every single woman in that boy's life, even his dentist. Also, that one couple where an American woman marries an Indian man, and his family hates her because she can't make Indian food or cover herself up in front of the father-in-law. Story 44. Tsunami videos from the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami and the 2011 Japanese tsunami are absolutely mesmerizing because they just do not seem real. Story 45. Started on Wikipedia trying to find the name of the actress who played Lois Lane in the old TV series, Phyllis Coates, and just by following links ended up with a story about a porn star living in the tunnels of Las Vegas, Jenny Lee. Midway through, there was a murder and kidnapping story and a cocaine condo money laundering scheme, making it even stranger. Superman led to murder and kidnapping, then to a former porn star living in tunnels. That's enough internet for one day. Story 46. Ants Canada, where the narrator can make you feel sad for the loss of his fire ant colony, nicknamed the Fire Nation. Story 47. The Kenneka Jenkins story is one I have watched many times in video footage on repeat and slow motion, yet there is still no answer and no person held responsible. I do not believe she wandered in there alone. There was a rumor that her organs were stolen and that Selena Gomez received a kidney because she happened to be in town for a kidney transplant. Story 48. I used to not be a fan of mysteries, especially online mysteries, until I stumbled upon the Jim Jack 336 mystery on the internet some time ago. Basically, I'll keep it short. A very old sim racing community, not racing, had a well-known community modder who helped members set up groups or teams to create mods. One day, he randomly disappeared. However, this was not well known in the community at the time, as it was mostly only known among the modders themselves. JimJack336 had a Reddit account with the same name that went inactive around the same time. Years later, many people discovered that several sim racing community modding groups were actually set up and managed by this JimJack336. They also found that some modding group websites had the name JimJack336 in the HTML code, along with the name of a company called Full Throttle Limited. People then researched the company and found it was a foreign shell company located in the British Virgin Islands. Some experts discovered that the intermediary of the shell company was an infamous offshore intermediary firm called Mossack Fonseca. There are many documentaries about the controversies involving this firm and its dealings with private ultra-wealthy individuals, especially related to financial crimes. People became suspicious that a possibly wealthy man who had a Reddit account named JimJack336 was using these modding groups to shield his shell companies from potentially shady businesses, using the sim racing community as a front. Story 49. The lockpicking lawyer is the best lockpicker you will ever come across. After many hours of watching him pick locks in a minute or less, you learn that Master is a poor quality company. Story 50. Reading old grimoires. Books of ritual magic, the older, the better. I don't believe magic exists and they read a lot like fan fiction, but it was fun. Story 51. I saw a man on television who injected saline solution into his forehead to create a large bagel shape. I searched for saline injections and found an entire forum of men who inject saline solution into their testicles to make them appear larger. Story 52. I still wonder. Back in 2019, Hurricane Dorian hit the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas. There were thousands of Haitians living in a slum called the Mud at the end of the island. The slum was wiped off the map, along with approximately 3,000 Haitians. I have never found any answers about the Haitians or any bodies. Story 53. The sinking of the Titanic was actually an insurance fraud gone wrong. However, like most conspiracy theories, it is too convoluted, and someone involved would have admitted to it. Story 54. I do not like Beyoncé, but I saw a TikTok video of Beyoncé doing the mute challenge and liked it because it looked kinda cool. I swear every third video I scrolled was a Beyoncé video. Story 55. Reading about the mostly women who are addicted to eating talcum powder is almost unbelievable, but it is true. Story 56. The Denver airport conspiracy includes gargoyles, lizard people, Illuminati, and art featuring dead babies. There is something for everyone. Story 57. Way back in the 1990s, there was a site called Useless Web Pages. It provided links to thousands of web pages that had little or no appeal, such as random collections of CDs or doll heads, finding your birthday in pie, a catalog of the films of Ron Jeremy, and fake user counters. I spent hours exploring them, either shaking my head or laughing madly. Story 58. I remember getting very lost in a Paul McCartney is Dead and was replaced by a winner in a Paul McCartney lookalike competition rabbit hole when you had to go to the library to use the internet. It is still one of my favorite conspiracy theories. Story 59. Kathy Bates's grandfather believed John Wilkes Booth did not die and that he met him while running a general store. However, he apparently did not believe him at the time. Eventually, the man died and no one claimed his body, so it became a boardwalk attraction. The grandfather obtained the body and tried to sell it to Henry Ford. The body went from carnival to carnival and eventually ended up in someone's apartment before it disappeared. He wrote a book about it. Story 60. Zits. I watched many videos, and then suddenly a tutorial on how to wax a man's private areas appeared. I watched the in-depth video and felt fully confident that I could wax a man in an emergency waxing situation. Story 61. YouTube videos about group stalking. People believed the entire neighborhood was involved in their surveillance. Some strange videos were difficult to explain as mere coincidence. Story 62. Removing honeycombs from homes, for example, if they are embedded in the roof. Story 63. The English royal family. I am trying to figure out why they are still relevant. Most European nations still have a monarch, but they seem so normal, like they are just doing a 9 to 5. The English seem to treat it as if it is still 300 years ago. As an American, it is easier to learn about past monarchs than it is to learn about American presidents. The sad part is I do not like them for that reason, and I feel they have little to no accountability. It is mind-blowing. Story 64. I couldn't sleep one night. I started looking up where random celebrities are from, something I don't usually care about unless they are vocal about it. I thought it would help me fall asleep, and I ended up reading about Nunavut for hours. I had never even heard of Nunavut before. Now, about a decade later, I love talking about it. Story 65. Barbershop quartet competitions. I fell into that because I was still using drugs, so I spent about 12 hours a day just nodding off and watching these competitions one after another. It was super fascinating. Story 66. One topic I never intended to explore was the Boston bombings. They are strangely connected to a mysterious triple murder in Massachusetts and a Chechen mixed martial arts fighter who was killed by Federal Bureau of Investigation agents. It was a solid 3 hours I do not regret. Story 67. I've never told anyone this before. In 2014, during a depressive episode, I spent $87 on Candy Crush. Story 68. I saw a post that was being shared on Facebook saying our country is turning away from God because Washington is now facing away from "In God We Trust" on the quarter. I went down a deep rabbit hole about the history of the quarter design and all of the versions that exist. Story 69. Dominoes. There is a whole culture of people who build enormous structures out of tens of thousands of dominoes and knock them down. Check out Lily Hevish. Story 70. Unsolved crimes could take days to read, especially cases where there seem to be police cover-ups for one reason or another. Story 71. Child Immortality Project was a collection of websites created by a person or possibly a bot in the early 2000s. It used many images of spiders and satellite maps. The sites argued that death only exists because it is legally allowed, and that the president at any time could decree that no one else dies and we would become immortal. It was clearly the product of a person with schizophrenia or severe mental health issues. There were supposedly thousands of these websites at one point, which led people to believe an algorithm might be generating them. Story 72. I watched history be made here. It was phenomenal. Story 73. Until you can tear and burn the marshmallow to escape the evil one, it will be impossible for your educated, brilliant brain to know that 4 different corner harmonic 24-hour days rotate simultaneously within a single 4-quadrant rotation of a squared equator and cubed Earth. Story 74. Operation Legacy. The British government's ongoing operation to hide all the atrocities Britain has committed over the centuries appears to have been successful. They operated concentration camps, a concept they invented in Africa up to the 1960s. I became interested after talking to several British people about the Irish potato famine. They learned in school that the government sent food aid and set up various support schemes to help. That is where their education about it ends. They do not learn that those schemes were stopped after a few months and that the government switched priorities to exporting food from Ireland for the rest of the famine years. The famine lasted 7 years. After that, I looked at what they did in India and across Africa. British people have no idea. All of it was done in their name. This is not simply history. The last government passed legislation to cover up what the army and security services did in Northern Ireland. The current government is under pressure from the International Criminal Court and the United Nations, as well as families of victims, to reverse it. I am not saying what they did was right or wrong, but they are covering it up. Story 75. I used to research the unethical practices common companies engage in the United States and overseas. Nestle is one most people are aware of nowadays, but they also own several other water extraction companies disguised as local brands. I heard of one nearby questionable deal and found the water rights were handed over for a small bribe of a few $1,000s. Nestle said they would even dig another water source for us, so we would be all set. They did dig another well, but it was poorly done and dried up almost immediately, leading to a major drought in the area that persists to this day. A typical corporate bait and switch. I guess it is not that unusual, but I still find it concerning that companies can engage in such harmful practices and never face anything more than a fine. They know they have the resources to say and do anything they want. Story 76. I fell down a giant rabbit hole and ended up debunking the 25-year-old animation conspiracy that claimed The Lion King was a ripoff of Kimba the White Lion. Story 77. Rug cleaning. Barn-find cars are not about restoring them, just digging them out of where they are stored and bringing them into the light. Story 78. Portugal is actually in Eastern Europe. The number of cultural similarities between Portugal and Eastern Bloc countries is remarkable. Story 79. I randomly stumbled on a blog that was all about the old-school 1980s and 1990s Nazi punk scene, written by a fan deeply involved in the scene. It was totally nostalgia-focused, because it was more of an, oh, look how young we all were kind of blog with home pictures of bands, fans, and skinheads at parties. It was pretty interesting. I forgot the site, but it had something like Blood and Honor in the name. I hate Nazis like anyone else, but I am also fascinated by them, and getting to see their own spaces through the years was a total rabbit hole. Story 80. It's a man rambling about how Stephen King supposedly murdered John Lennon and used Mark David Chapman as a scapegoat. He has been seen driving a van around promoting his theory and website since the early 2000s. He still updates his website to this day and wrote his own booklet about it. Story 81. I am ready to start my long weekend with whatever unusual content this thread has for me. Story 82. I needed information on pollination of a number of food-producing tree species for a novel I am working on, and discovered that avocado trees are quite unusual because their flowers are male for half of the day and female for the other half. Some cultivars' flowers are male in the morning and female in the afternoon, some the opposite, and around 2 to 2:30 p.m. there is usually enough overlap so that there are some of each on the tree. Different cultivars also flower and fruit at different times of the year, so there is a surprising amount of logistics involved if you want a novel in which a subsistence-level agrarian village has reasonably steady access to avocados. If you want 2 avocado trees that flower and fruit near the same time and have opposite male and female schedules to pollinate each other, I recommend 1 Bacon and 1 Haas. Story 83. I have spent hours on YouTube watching a person eat military meals ready-to-eat packs from different countries. It is very addictive. Story 84. Underground Facebook. I have an ex from just before the pandemic who has a degree in computer science and is the most resourceful programmer I have known. I was unaware of her talents at first, but I left after seeing her casually doing things that not many people know how to do. Plus, she is very skilled. She showed me Underground Facebook one day. I was blown away. It is like Facebook, but you have to know how to type the names of the accounts to access it, and they use multiple keyboards to avoid surveillance. This was disturbing. There were accounts with names like this, "Hey, do you want some drugs?" There is really suspicious activity there. I think there is probably human trafficking and many other illegal things going on. For example, you might come across a roommate advertisement with a picture of a living room and a minor female sitting on the sofa in the background. This was about 7 years ago. We live in a scary world, my friends. I feel uncomfortable knowing how many dangerous people live among us and casually display their activities in the open. Story 85. Mowing lawns and clearing overgrown vegetation. Detailing cars. Who needs a plot? Story 86. Back in the days of LiveJournal, I discovered the world of proanorexia and bulimia, and I could not believe that these people were real. Later, seeing documentaries and news stories about it was even stranger. Story 87. I started watching old episodes of To Catch a Predator a few years ago on YouTube. That led me down the Lorne Armstrong rabbit hole. Lorne was one of the predators caught on the show, and fans have been catfishing him ever since he got out of prison. Those of us who keep up with the Lorne saga are called Lorneographers, and we belong to the Church of Cod. Story 88. Not me, but my husband. We had quit cigarettes for 2 weeks and should have been improving. The first week is the worst. We hung out with friends and smoked weed with them. It was a pre-roll. The next day, we felt like we were back to day 1 of quitting cigarettes. My husband discovered that companies are now adding chemicals to pre-rolled joints and rolling papers that are also found in cigarettes and make them addictive. These chemicals are also being added to sugary foods and alcohol. Story 89. I started wondering if it is possible to be a bounty hunter just by searching on the internet. I found a list of open bounties and began researching these individuals. I managed to track down one person, but he was a young child who had failed to appear for a minor possession charge. It did not feel right to turn him in. Story 90. Whenever I watch a movie or television show, I love reading about the cast. My fascination does not stop once the movie ends. Instead, I pick one or two cast members that I find particularly interesting and find out everything the internet can tell me about them. I look for details about their past relationships, scandals, brand deals, and more. This goes to the point where I bring these fun facts up randomly in conversations. Then, when I watch another movie or television show, the process starts all over again. My current obsession is Simon Baker from The Mentalist. Story 91. The abduction and rescue of Shasta Groon is a horrible real-life horror story. Story 92. Chumbawamba on YouTube. They are way more than just the one hit that we all know. They have songs about being added on Facebook and about jokingly torturing James Hetfield. Definitely check out the live performances. They show how talented and ridiculous the band is. Story 93. Once a friend told me to look up videos of squid mating on YouTube because it looks interesting, so I found a video called The Octopus View of Human Sexual Excitation instead. I discovered an entire collection of unusual videos by a creator named Happy Theory about human anatomy. It is a very complicated and unconventional theory of how the human body works, based on odd metaphysical ideas and related to Tai Chi. He is very focused on masturbation, the penis, and homosexuality. He speaks in a serious monotone voice that adds to the humor. He has hundreds of videos. My favorite is Masturbation Will Make You a Trapezoid. Look it up. You will not be disappointed. Story 94. Cicada 3301. A random group of unknown people were looking for geniuses to join their group of hackers. They claimed responsibility for leaking significant information and influencing events behind the scenes. They created numerous ciphers and puzzles spanning several years, some physically hidden in real life. The puzzles became increasingly difficult. Some were extremely hard to solve. Even knowing the answers, it is impressive how people figured them out. Some remain unsolved to this day. There is a 60-page book filled with hidden messages and clues but no clear explanation of its purpose. Only individuals who solved all puzzles solo were selected to proceed. After that, puzzles were no longer made public. Unique tests were created for each person who advanced this far. This served as a screening process since they wanted only the best. In the end, only a few people completed the multi-year challenge. It turns out the entire process was essentially recruitment for a small group of people who would simply chat and were not actively involved in anything. Some who joined later leaked the ciphers and solutions after leaving. Although it led to nothing substantial, the difficulty of the puzzles and the intelligence required to create and solve them is remarkable. Story 95. These people are completely unhinged in their absolute primal, visceral hatred. These people are the same as above. Absolutely unglued, detached from reality, absurd beyond comprehension loathing. Story 96. I remember when I discovered How to Basic on YouTube. I stopped everything I was doing for 3 days and binged every single video. Story 97. Reddit group Gangs Talking and others discuss stories about people who believe the government is watching them, often involving individuals with mental illnesses. Gangs Talking allows you to observe the development and progression of these mental health issues in real time. Story 98. Clockwork elves are an interesting example of shared hallucinations. Story 99. I worked for a Department of Defense agency, Defense Contract Management Agency. When we first got the internet at work, I searched for Defense Contract Management Agency. I do not think we even had Google at that time. It did not find an agency of the United States government, but it did find the Dutch Country Music Association. Not exactly a wormhole, but humorous. Story 100. September 11th. More specifically, how the Central Intelligence Agency released an image of a handwritten letter discussing events that would occur on September 11, 2001. Although the date on the letter, I believe, was June of 2000. I saw the image in 2019. I recently went back into the archives to search for it, but was unsuccessful in finding it. I believe they took it down, which raises the question, why? Story 101 Cookie Run. The game has been on my radar on and off for more than 5 years, but I did not dive into it until a couple of years after Kingdom. 2 weeks later, I am one of those people who create fan fiction about my favorite characters. Story 102. The 1955 Sierra Leonean Leone's Man's disaster started with watching a short documentary years ago and went deep to the point where I have probably seen every single one ever made, read every article and book on it, and researched each car and driver involved. It was fun. Story 103. A group on YouTube tried to develop a sixth sense of magnetism by demonstrating how to insert a small magnet into their finger using a scalpel. They carefully cut and aligned the magnet inside, mentioning that a gold-plated magnet was better or something similar. They then left it in place. Story 104. Diane House. I got completely absorbed in the story, only to find out it was a viral marketing campaign for a movie that was never made. If I recall correctly. Story 105. I don't know why, but I love videos on YouTube about breaking bread. I have never baked one in my life. Story 106. Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or China's Warring States period. Fascinating material. Story 107. The Ingalls family of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Her daughter, Rose Wilder, was friends with and influenced Ayn Rand's philosophy. Her sister Carrie was married to the man who named Mount Rushmore. Carrie's stepson was one of the carvers of Mount Rushmore. It was an engaging read. Story 108. Yearbook archives are available online for most high schools in the United States. I enjoy picking a random state, finding a random town in the middle of nowhere, and looking at their yearbook from 1982. It is fascinating to see these random people and wonder what they are doing with their lives now. Story 109. Esoteric rabbit holes. Now I am enlightened. I just wanted to learn how to summon Satan, and now I am meditating every day. What a waste of time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.